with Warren Weeks, and I'm sitting in the offices of Cubit Research in St Kilda Road in Melbourne. How are you, Warren?
I'm well, thank you, Trevor.
Warren, we've known each other for a little while now. You've just moved in here. The company's getting bigger. How many staff have you got?
We've got about 15, but actually what we're seeing a trend towards more the requirement for global language specialists, and we bring them in on an ad hoc basis. So there's about 15 of us full-time, and then any number of folk. I think currently we deal with about 42 languages, so obviously there's a few.
Now, I know that you do a lot here in this headquarters at Cubit. Can you just quickly, on the back of the envelope, what is Cubit now? Because I know it's been moving and people have known what you've done in the past. It's not kind of what you're probably doing now.
Yeah, Cubit started out 1995. I came back from the US. I was a director of marketing with a computer company working between Pac Asia and California, and I was very frustrated that as a communications guy, when I stood before the board, I couldn't prove my value. I couldn't say to folks, hey, you know, not like a sales guy, I made my budget, or an engineering guy, I shaved so many % off the manufacturing costs. When it comes to communications, it's, as we all know, it's somewhat esoteric. It's an intangible. So I'd worked with some folks around the world, Metrica Pacific in London, I'd seen the Karma product out of New York, and I just thought that people could measure stuff better. So that was how Cubit started.
So when you're saying stuff, you're talking about clippings online? Yeah,
well, in those days it was not online. Even though I worked for a computer company, we had an internal email system, but you couldn't go external. So it was just it was pretty primitive stuff by today's standards. So yeah, it was predominantly clippings, and you'd get great stacks of clippings from all over the world, and you had to work out what does that mean in terms of message cut through, competitive positioning, and successful communication with an audience.
So that mission still hasn't changed. It's just the tools around it have changed incredibly in that time.
Yeah, you could say that. Both the volume, the sheer vastness of the media market has changed, and also, of course, the variety of media that we've got to work with, the channels. It's interesting because I did some research some time ago, actually, for a government office, and I looked back at newspapers, and newspapers were around from the Roman times, and then you had radio, and it was a different channel. But as communicators, we seem to embrace that pretty easily. And then in the 40s and 50s, we had television. So then you've just got another channel. But we didn't think of them as being completely different worlds. It's only been of late, when we've had social media, that we've, for some reason, decided that these are completely different things. And so obviously the analytics market has changed in as much that we have to now look at print. We look at broadcast, of course, and of all sorts, but now we're looking at online and cable and things like that. So bringing all of that together in an integrated solution means a different approach. It means different methodologies, different sciences involved, although slightly. But the volume of material has gone, that's where the real challenge comes.
Crazy times.
In 2004, I think it was, we were looking at somewhere of the order of 3 million online and social pieces a month. We now study 130 million online a month, and I can never keep up. Last time I looked, it was 1.8 million social media pieces a day. So that's obviously you need bigger computers. You need a lot more disk. We tallied up the other day. We now have the disk capacity of 4,000 business PCs.
All housed here.
Housed here, between here and a bunker, where we keep a very good backup.
Yeah, well, you need it, and but you also get these feeds from other sources. You've got a partnership.
Yeah, it's something that people have complained about for a long time. How do we get global news? Because often if you try and get a clipping company in the States and then one in Europe, or it might not be Europe, one in France, one in Germany, one in Italy, one in England, you'll find that the costs absolutely go through the roof. So we formed a partnership with the company that is arguably the largest aggregator of online news content in the world. It's called Moreover Technologies. Not many people have heard about them because they're basically a wholesaler. About 60-70% of the world's clipping companies, monitoring companies, get their online content from Moreover Technologies. And so they're good guys to partner with. They have an unbelievable array of sources from all over the world. Last time I looked, it was 223 countries and 48 languages. And it's everything that appears in the news environment all over the world in every language every 15 seconds.
So that's okay for the big global companies, of which they exist in Australia. What about, government departments that really only want to worry about Victoria, or a smaller PR firm or a smaller company that has a need to be on top of what's being said about the company and their industry or profession, but they don't need the Rolls Royce, they just need a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point, because getting in bed with Moreover gives us the scope. But you're right, Moreover is this huge wholesaling organisation, and it does not have products that are scoped out and at the right price point for the little guys. And most people in Australia in global terms are the little guys, right? So
even in non-global terms, they're even smaller.
They're pretty small. So what we did was we've created a series of products that bring this enormous global source list, but drag it right down to just a few $100 a month, and we can make that available to people.
So I remember when going back in the dark ages of public relations consulting, and so I've been through a few incarnations of media monitoring, but it was the clippings, clipped manually, and then they started being scanned and PDF'd and sent to you, and it got quicker and quicker. How quick is it today then? I mean, everything's real time, so does that mean everything you do is super fast, or not, because you've still got people measuring the sentiment of it?
Okay, so you've got to break it apart now. The only way you can make sense of something that is as vast as today's media landscape is to break it up into what you're going to do and when you need to do it. Because clearly you cannot have people analysing everything, every second, everywhere, in every language. That's simply unaffordable.
And not everyone needs it.
And not everyone needs it. So you've got to match the requirements of a client or a market against the capabilities of what you can do. And even with our technologies, which are pretty darn good, that would be undoable. So okay, we look at harvesting and sourcing content for what's increasingly being called discovery. So monitoring. Okay, monitoring was a group of people going out reading newspapers. That almost doesn't happen anymore. Direct feeds from publishers, direct feeds from websites, direct feeds from people like Associated Press in the States and these sorts of guys. That's often the root of the content. It comes from the content creator.
So let's just unpack that for a tick. You've got online, so you've got Herald Sun, Daily Telly, The Australian, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald. Is what's online isn't necessarily what's on the news in the newspapers, although that is changing to varying degrees depending on the day. But what about if there is something in the newspaper, but it's not in their online version of the newspaper? Do you get that? What happens there? Okay,
so one of the more recent innovations from Moreover is that, as well as doing everything online, the president and the CEO have been going around doing deals with publishers all over the world. And those publishers are now providing not only their online content, but also their print, what we would describe as their PDF content. So that now comes from the presses into Moreover's systems, and exactly the same kind of search and discovery goes on. So now one of our clients can opt in on print broadcast, as well as online and social in a fully integrated solution. And that's kind of nice.
Well, that is nice. I mean, otherwise, there are plenty of tools, free, paid for services, and then the traditional media monitoring services. And I guess because there are so many channels that you know, depending on what you're doing, you could use any number of those. So what you're trying to do is consolidate them. So in Discovery means you'll actually get the clippings and that side of things, but you can take it up a notch and have them analysed for an extra fee.
Correct. So there's three levels that we're going through. There's search, where you bring it in and you can do what you want with that, just as you've always done. The difference between and that's called the news desk service. So the difference between news desk and a lot of traditional portals, if you like, is news desk does allow you to bring things in from all over the world, one source, but it also means that instead of having different clipping companies around the place, and you're often faced with the need to have to pay each of them a retainer and then a per piece fee. With Newsdesk, because it's coming through the one channel, there's one retainer, there's one search fee, and we manage all of the things, the inconvenient stuff. If there's copyright differences between countries, our billing systems track that. We, of course, have to remit the right amount of copyright. We bill our clients for copyright. But, for instance, it's very expensive in Germany, it's very inexpensive in the US, somewhere in between for the UK. Australia has a different copyright regime than any of those countries. So we manage all of that for our clients, and so that's the first level. You've got the content, royalties are all taken care of for you, it's affordable, and it's right there at your fingertips. The next one up is, now, what do you want to do with that stuff? Do you want to produce daily newsletters? Do you want them to be really pretty? Do you want the dissemination of that material to go out to different people and to look differently, to have a different focus? So the executive team will obviously be focused on something different from guys who specialise in merger and acquisition. Or you might have a client who's in aviation. Well, they're interested in something way different to folks who, if you've got a client base that are across industries, aviation's different to automotive or government and policy. So the ability to discover, sort, assemble into a newsletter, and then fire that out to people such that they've got click-through access, that's really what I would call the first level up from just your plain media monitoring source.
So that is when, is that been analysed?
It's only analysed in as much that it's gone through a lot of filters to make sure there's no junk in it. There's no off-brief content. Now, increasingly, that's being considered the first level of analysis, because again, it used to be 3 million a month, now it's 130 million a month. Just the amount of noise that comes through is significantly increased. So,
when you say a newsletter, I'm not used to getting clippings in a newsletter, so this could be an article from the Oz, something from the Fin Review, it could be a small magazine piece, it could be a notation that it was mentioned on 3AW News, and here's what people are tweeting about, and a little bit on LinkedIn.
Correct, and that could be put through by the professional communications team inside an organisation. Could put that together very quickly in the morning, slap it together, then put commentary on it so that the executives or the other stakeholders know what's going on in Précis, and they go click, boom, turns up on your BlackBerry, on your iPhone, on your desktop, whatever.
So they're just headings?
They're just headings with potentially summaries or some basic analysis in there.
And they've been edited by the comms team?
Generally. We can do the editing, but a lot of folk decide that they really want to do that, so they maintain editorial control over what the executives see.
So analytics-wise, you've been filtered, you've hopefully filtered the junk out through various means, and then the second layer is the internal people doing it.
Yeah, and then we're about to release a new product called Assist, and Assist will provide tools to the communication team so they can go through. It's like an online analysis system. So they can go through and do simple analysis and charting and produce that internally, or they can push the Assist button and they can select the content or give us a brief, push the Assist button, and that turns up on the desktop of a series of analysts inside Cubit, and we actually do the work and then return the report.
Like a media analysis fairy on your shoulder.
Yeah, it's kind of like
Angel.
Yeah, like crowdsourcing, but just from one crowd.
So you can call on the media analysis fairy or angel or assistant, and up it comes. So there's lots of options for people. So it's a fair bit to get people to get their head around. Now, when we talk analysis now, because going back in the dark ages, we would see a clipping, we'd cut it, we'd give it to the client, we'd highlight certain things, we'd tell them if we thought that this was, our key messages were there, whether we had some visual brand there in a picture, if the names were mentioned, the sentiment was fine, the messages were getting out. So obviously those things don't change. They're still things that we're all interested in. But so when they're analysed from you guys internally, or the tools that you get, what are the things that are analysed then? Is it deeper than that?
Yeah, potentially. Again, folk have different requirements. Some people just come to us and say, it's a complex environment, so if we can just know what our share of voice is in this complex environment, then we'll be happy with that. Not too many people, but some. And that might be if you're in a software company, you've got 43 different competitors, but they compete in areas that overlap with you, and you need to cut through and make sense of that very complex competitive environment. Mostly people want to know 5 things. They want to know how much coverage they've got, how often they get it versus the other guy, how good that is in terms of favourability, how clear the messages have been, and how impactful in terms of getting through to the right audience. So how much, how often, how good, how clear, and how impactful.
You can measure those?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really the beginning. That's the basic stuff. In today's technology. I mean, a few years ago, it was AVE and how many clippings you got, but as you say, that's gone.
I beg to differ on the AVE, but some people still use an AVE, an advertising equivalent, which probably went out in 1982, but it probably shouldn't be around anymore.
Yeah, you're right, and I've been watching with interest the discussions around the world about AVE, and the reality is it's not a good measure, but
why is it still measured?
Well, it's still measured, I think, because boards and senior executives want to attach some kind of number, some kind of dollar value to, as I said right at the beginning, an intangible activity. So if you measure sales, it's in dollars. You measure savings in a production process, it's in dollars. So how can I measure my communications activity in dollars?
So you've got a small mention in a big important article. You've got your key message out in a prestigious publication versus a profile and a 2-pager in another industry publication. So the dollar value will be probably with the 2-pager, not the 2 centimetre by 1 column mention, yet the impact and the power of the small one could be 100 times the other.
Yeah, and I often suggest to communicators that instead of going with AVE, if they can sway the organisation away from just that dollar view, that they look at their below the line, their PR type activities with a similar kind of return on investment calculation as you would use when you're evaluating an ad campaign. And as a former marketer, I used to look at ad campaigns and I'd say, well, how much is this going to cost me overall? Production costs and placement costs. And then I would look at how many people in my target audience am I going to reach? And if it made sense to me that it was a good creative, it was powerful, and it was likely to influence people, and I could afford it, then I had a cost per 1,000 likely influence hits. You can actually do the same thing with PR. You can turn around and look at the cost of production and placement, staff costs, and everything associated with placing key messages in front of target audiences, and that's one of the analytics elements that we offer.
So how does it work then? You've got bloggers now and people on Twitter, and you cover public Facebook pages.
Yeah, public Facebook.
LinkedIn is public, so you grab that.
Anything that's public.
Public,
you get
okay.
into real trouble trying to cover anything that's
Well,
private.
yeah, I wouldn't have thought you could. But so Twitter, and how are you putting a measure to, or analysing is probably easy to a degree. You know, there's going to be nuances depending on you know, people can say things that might look positive but are actually negative, and vice versa. But as a rule, how are the measures then put across? You know, and the influence of a blogger per se, who might not have a massive audience. Can you tell the size of the audience of the blogger for a starters?
That's difficult, because unless that blog site actually carries advertisements or is hooked in with Google Analytics or something like that, which is then published, unless you can actually get some kind of audited figure, you're at the mercy of the blogger saying, oh, we have, you know, 100,000 people a month looking at our site.
So really though, you still look at it as a measure in terms of sentiment and what they're saying, and it could be that there might be 3 bloggers in an industry going down a particular path. It's not so much the numbers, but it could be a red flag.
It could be
positively or negatively.
Yeah, you're right. It could be a red flag. The way we talk about this stuff is changing, and I think this is a key aspect of analytics and also the carrying out of the communications activity, whether you're an agency or in-house. I think we have a greater requirement than ever before to start thinking in terms of integrated communications. It's not just advertising or it's PR. Now all of a sudden we're starting to say, or I believe we should be starting to say, what's likely to fulfill our role, our mission as communicators? And it's either to change people's perceptions or ultimately, through changing their perceptions of whatever it is we do, to create a change in behaviour. It's buy our product, it's vote for our government, it's use our whatever, our trains or something like that. So
take an action.
Yep. So it's a behaviour. So we've developed this this particular regime called line of sight. Line of sight analytics starts to look at the totality of the communication environment. And it is exactly as I said, it's a line of sight between we said this, someone else says this, we say this, so it's the communication, is the dialogue that's going on. If there is attitudinal surveys involved, then we can bring those into the analysis. So
external.
Okay. We all said this, people said that they think this, and then we can look at the behaviours.
So you can match if someone's done. So a good way to say whether you've researched, whether you've changed people's behaviours with your communications program is you take benchmark research at the front, and then after 3 months you do it again and see if there's been a change.
Yep.
Quite basic. So you can then measure, well, analyse what's been in the press, on radio, across social media channels, and then independently there's research done and you look at that and you can overlay the two to say, well, people are saying this, but it's actually in terms of the research, but it doesn't appear to have happened in terms of the coverage. Is that
correct? So you can say, despite the fact that all this was said, it does not appear to have had any impact on what people say they're thinking.
But what can you also analyse then? What are people saying on? Forget the media per se, but what is the chatter in online, and that will give you maybe an idea of what the research, and measure that with the research. That would be quite interesting to see whether they match up, or am I just getting too esoteric?
It's all doable, but it's very difficult to explain in a couple of minutes. But okay. The bottom line, I guess, is that you can look at what is said, and you can break that down through any channel.
Yep.
And you can look at what the chatter between the channels. Mm-hmm. This was tweeted, then it was picked up in a blog, then it was picked up in a mainstream. So you can look at,
follow that.
Absolutely. We call it referential and derivative analytics. We don't want to go there.
No.
But
no referentials.
But
please.
it's what was referred to, or when someone picks up a subject and then decides to run with a slightly different version of that story or a different twist on it, that's a derivative.
So you can follow how something's unfolded.
Correct. How it unfolds, evolves, develops, and then maybe ultimately dies. Or it might morph into another argument or discussion completely.
Okay, so that takes us into the more organic, issues-based. You know, a company might have an issue that's been percolating, and then they can sort of start following that, track it, and if it blows up, they can track it back. So we have that side of things, obviously very important for a lot of businesses. Others ones would be more in the Marcom side of the space. So I don't want to get into any specific industry, but maybe something like a state-based tourism authority. Not sure if you work for any of those. Don't mind. Don't tell me if you do. But just say a state-based tourism authority. They have a launch for a new tourist campaign for Melbourne or for Sydney or wherever. So they have a launch, and there's a bit of chatter about it. The ad goes up. The media is covering it. People are chatting about it because there were some bloggers and tweeters brought in and involved. Maybe you've got some blogger ambassadors. You've got all this activity happening, which does happen at a launch today, and today you have social influencers as well as still doing the traditional media stuff. And if there's the budget, then there's more integration with, for example, with advertising. So you can collate all that together through the one door, through the one channel.
You can do that, and then you can go one step further, and provided the figures are made available potentially by the client or another research house that they might be employing, you can actually then look at what was the change in behaviour, i.e. in terms of tourism, how many additional people booked to come to that particular
So that can be
state.
plugged into the overall monitoring or the analytics. So you've got monitoring, analytics, and then you can plug in the research over and above if the client will give that up.
Yeah, it's the behavioural stuff. So it's everything from creating, starting the process all the way through to what you might call the ethnographics, the looking at how the behaviour changes.
Is there a referential ethnographic? No.
That's just ridiculous.
I know. Well, okay, we're going to finish up there, but I just thank you for your time. I'm really,
Pleasure.
Yeah, I was going to sort of ask where the trends are, but the trends are unfolding where we are. And, as someone who's gone through media monitoring millions of times and all of that sort of stuff, and we've all done it in PR, and it's, today we have to monitor, obviously, online, and that's a whole new ball game, and to be able to pull the things together, is it still... So we're on the cusp of all this is happening now. Is it just going to be more consolidation in this space? Or what do you see, what's around the corner in terms of analytics and monitoring for comms and marketing people?
Yeah, I think what you can start to see is disparate organisations that perhaps where one has done blogs and one has done tweets and someone else has done what I might call traditional analytics. They're being acquired by sort of umbrella organisations and coming together. It's this move towards having to integrate the discovery, the sorting and the making available of information to a whole organisation from many disparate sources. So that's being integrated. Then the analysis is being integrated from all these different sources because ultimately, and I'm sure I said this to you more than once, that the whole premise of the way of communication is that our behaviour comes from our perceptions, and our perceptions are formed or changed through repetitious exposure to consistent messages from multiple credible sources. And those multiple credible sources are now spanning a number of different channels. So there is an absolute requirement from the board level all the way down to have an integrated view of what's happening in your communication landscape, to make sense of it, and then to take lessons out of that you can use in planning, in tactical responses, and in issues management. And integration is the key trend going forward.
And I'll just throw one more in that I did forget because I'm doing a lot in the content marketing space, and we're talking about media covering your issue or your product or your industry. But now a lot of, and certainly we're going to see a lot more of that now, companies will become their own media channels. So no doubt that would all plug into it as well.
It's certainly one of the channels that you then have to integrate into that mix.
Yep. Warren, thank you very much for your time.
Trevor, pleasure.